It is now my honor to invite on stage Father Alexis Smith for a prayer.
Thank you. Permit me to offer the famous prayer for peace, authored by St. Francis of Assisi. He wrote it in the singular. I'm going to pray it in the plural, representing all of us. Lord, make us all instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
It is now my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Joshua Hoffman for a prayer.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for welcoming me and this gathering into the home of the Islamic Center of Southern California. The prayer I offer first begins with how we pray every day in Jewish communities. We begin with our own selves, and as the journey from the self into the collective evolves, there's a pivotal prayer that asks for new light, or chadash in Hebrew. It's not that the world is filled with darkness, and the light that we pray for is to shed upon that darkness, maybe to clear away some of the distinctions that separate us. But it is a prayer for new light, because each and every day we pray for the opportunity for new light to be revealed to us. And with that, we are here to share a message of new light together. Our prayer is that with our collective understanding, our commitment to ensuring peace and understanding between us, that the new light that is generated in this space and in every space where we reach out into the world radiates not only tolerance, not only understanding, but love and hope. Hope that tomorrow will be a brighter day than yesterday. وَخَدَشْ عَطْسِيَوْنْ تَعِيرٌ وَنِسْكَهُ لَنُ مَهَيْرَ لَأُرَوْ. We pray before we enter into any space of our own particularity, that we all pray that new light shines upon us, and that we may merit the radiance of that light in our midst and for us all. Amen.
It is now my pleasure to welcome on stage the Director of Universal Peace Federation of Southern California, Mr. Nasser Zomorod.
Thank you so much. This is my pleasure to be among you. It's amazing. I just imagine if God is standing right here and see his children with beautiful faces of all different colors, religion, this and that. How joyful is that for God to see that his children get together, resolve the problems that happen in history. So I want to thank you for Islamic Center that they allow us to come here. Appreciate that. Also, I truly appreciate Dr. Greenberg that you invited us and you organized this wonderful event. I really enjoyed that, to be honest with you. Yes, I am Executive Director of Universal Peace Federation with my wife. Always we work together as man and woman. I don't want to, just say, oh, I'm the one. No. Actually, she's the one. She supports me. Without her, I'm like a man without brain or something. So I really appreciate my wife, who is a mother. So Universal Peace Federation is very international, intercultural, interreligion, and very, very diverse. Throughout the world, we do a lots of interfaith, especially once a year in Korea, South Korea. We have World Summit. Before pandemic, I joined one of them, and it was about 6,000 leaders of current president, religious leaders, and all kind of leadership, economic leaders, academy, business leaders get together for one reason, to bring peace, unity in the world. So we are working in Southern California, and also we're looking for organization and individuals that is standing for peace and working so hard and dedicate themselves for peace and unity and reconciliation. And after I listened to two of Dr. Greenberg's speech, I was so moved by him. Actually, tears came to my eyes. And I said to myself and my wife that, Dr. Greenberg, he should come to our prayer Zoom. And he came to our prayer Zoom on the Zoom, on the internet, and he gave another speech. And I said, Dr. Greenberg deserves to be ambassador for peace. This is one thing that we're doing. We're looking for organization or individuals that are really working for peace. So we appoint them to be ambassador for peace. And I brought Dr. Greenberg, he became ambassador for peace on the Zoom. But today we brought his certificate, which is, certificate of recognition and the accomplishment that he did in his life, and he truly deserved. But before that, I want to mention actually, I want to ask my wife, my beautiful partner, to read that. But before that, just one more thing I forgot to say that, I experienced interfaith for 36 years individually, personally, because I'm 24 hours a day. Can you imagine? Because my wife is from Germany, and she's from a Catholic background. I'm from Iran and from Islamic background. So this is a real interfaith between me and my wife, to be honest with you, that I see the beauty of that. So to me, to my philosophy, interfaith is entering somebody's faith. Don't scare of who is that, and discover the beauty of that person's faith and respect that. And you can imagine, how beautiful all of the religion talk about peace, joy, happiness, and family values. So before that, actually, I want to mention that one more thing is that we're doing is National Parents Day, that President Clinton, when he was in power, and all of the Congress and Senator, they signed into law. So they end the last Sunday of July is Parents Day. So me and my wife again, we organized a National Parents Day in the city of Pasadena, City Hall. And Chief of Police come, also Dr. Jenkins, the international leader of Universal Peace Federation come. So we bring, outstanding parents, and we make them parents of the year, and we offer them certificate. And then we celebrate after that with lunch and music and entertainment. Without further ado, I have the certificate, and I want to ask my wife to read the content of that. Please. So you can see that what you're receiving, that Dr. Greenberg.
Yeah, so this is the Ambassador for Peace certificate given by the Universal Peace Federation. The Universal Peace Federation and the Interreligious and International Federation for World Peace acknowledge as ambassadors for peace those individuals whose lives exemplify the ideal of living for the sake of others, and who dedicate themselves to practices which promote universal moral values, strong family life, interreligious cooperation, international harmony, renewal of the United Nations, a responsible public media, and the establishment of a culture of peace. Transcending racial, national, and religious barriers, the Ambassadors for Peace contribute to the fulfillment of the hope of all ages, a unified world of peace, wherein the spiritual and material dimensions of life are harmonized. The Universal Peace Federation and the Interreligious and International Federation for World Peace are proud to hereby recognize as an Ambassador for Peace Dr. Eric Greenberg, and it's signed by our founder, Reverend Dr. Sonia Moon, and our co-founder, Dr. Hamza Hanwood.
So please, Dr. Please, the Ambassador, this is your new title. Dr. Ambassador Eric Greenberg, please step forward and receive your certificate. Yes, of course. Each Ambassador for Peace, we expecting you and the pray and support you to be bigger than what. And anybody want to know more about National Parents Day, we have flyers. And if you like to be Ambassador for Peace, please can you see me or my wife so we can review your activities and we invite you to be parents of it. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you.
Thank you so much for that honor. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were going to go with another introduction, but in light of my appointment by the Universal Peace Federation as an ambassador for peace, I feel it my duty to share some brief and preliminary thoughts on why I urged for this panel and my vision for it. I'm not at all an expert in this matter, despite having tried to educate myself on the issues and the history involved. And so I have opted not to sit on this panel, but to help recruit experts in my stead. Nevertheless, I would like to articulate a vision and a charge for this panel of distinguished scholars, faith leaders, and community activists. As a Jew who believes in the state of Israel's right to exist, and that Jews are indeed descended from the indigenous peoples of that region, and that their return to Israel does not constitute settlement or colonialism, I also believe in the right of Palestine to continue to exist as a sovereign entity, and that the Palestinian people also have a legitimate claim to indigeneity, as well as a share to the heritage of Abraham. Make no mistake, I was appalled at the targeting of civilian life by Hamas and was exceedingly disturbed by the continued holding of hostages. But I do not believe that the careless or deliberate targeting of a civilian population as punishment for the actions of their leadership is ever excusable. This is the stuff that ancient warfare was made of, in which entire peoples were brutally murdered or simply being on the other side. I had hoped that we had surpassed this in the 20th century with the advent of the Geneva Conventions. It has been rightly proclaimed that October 7th saw the greatest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. Just as rightly, we must acknowledge that the death toll in Gaza has presently reached the same order of magnitude as the death toll immediately following the bombing of Nagasaki, in excess of 35,000 human lives. We cannot decry the deliberate targeting of civilian life in one situation, but ignore or condone the other. Our organization, the IRTPJ, took nearly 4 months of observing and listening and studying the situation in Gaza and Israel before issuing a comprehensive statement, so as not to jump to quick conclusions that were poorly researched, simply jumping on the proverbial bandwagon, which would do no more which would do no more than to alienate an audience than to effect actual change. Early on, we very quickly issued a brief statement proclaiming that we stood for the safety of all civilians. But when we finally issued a more complete statement calling for a lasting ceasefire and a coordinated and comprehensive program of peace building, incorporating justice, reconciliation, and education, we were able to feel comfortable with our stance. In this statement available on our website, we referred to an article co-authored by Rabbi Zach Zeisman, the Jewish chaplain at Loyola Marymount University, and Dr. Amir Hussein, a scholar of Islam and a colleague of mine at LMU. Said article rejected the notion that one must only grieve for or show compassion for one side, or that by sympathizing with the suffering of political adversaries, one is necessarily taking sides, or that by calling for a change in policy or tactics, or by opposing the state of Israel's current pathway, that one is anti-Semitic. The article continued saying, there is no cause that is served by the murder of innocents. There is no justification for the killing of children. And I emphasize this, regardless of whether the children are babies in Israel or babies in Gaza, or all babies bleed the same. Rabbi Zach invoked the oft-cited parallel passages from both the Quran and the Babylonian Talmud, teaching that if anyone kills a person, it is as if they kill all humanity, while if anyone saves one life, it is as if they save the lives of all humanity. The article continues, we are tired of the conflict being framed in binaries or false dichotomies. Jews versus Arabs, Palestinians versus Israelis, left versus right. It's so much more complicated with so many more sides and stories than only just two. Rabbi Zach even notes the diverse understanding of Zionism among Jews today, intimating the most liberal to the most hardline right wing. The article ends with a message sent by Rabbi Sharon Brous in an email to her congregation on October 9th. What I am asking is for us to dare to hold the humanity, the heartache, and the need for security of the Jewish people, while also holding the humanity, the dignity, the need for justice of the Palestinian people. For too long, these two have been set up as a false binary. In fact, the only liberation will be a shared liberation. The only justice is a justice for all, end quote. And so as we continued planning our march over the last several months and the panel discussion that would conclude the day's events, I held this article in mind. Its admonitions were always close at hand and in my heart. I considered that I cannot stand by while cousins are killing cousins. And that is what we are, Palestinians and Israeli Jews. We are children of Abraham, separated by enough generations to forget our origins and our shared birthright. When we began to plan this march back in August, we knew we had to expand our vision even further to be more than just a feel-good march. But when October 7th occurred, followed by Israel's response, we knew that we needed to do something about it. I didn't want this march to be merely another feel-good march. And so I recommended a panel discussion. What we need right now, and what I asked humbly for this panel to do, is to model for our audience deep and compassionate listening. Listening that treats each panelist like a human being with depth and dignity, with lived experiences that have made them who they are, that acknowledges their shared humanity, their unique life experiences and situations. Two of my role models, jazz musician and anti-racism activist Daryl Davis, who has de-radicalized literally dozens of Ku Klux Klan members, and documentarian and interfaith activist Valerie Kaur, both encourage this methodology, with Davis saying that if we keep people talking, at least they are not fighting. And with Kaur admonishing us to operate with wonder and inquiry about what makes that other person unique and a worthy creation of God. Maybe none of us would consider our colleagues sitting here to be tantamount to the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazis, but we have certainly heard the proverbial other being referred to that way in the media, be it as genocidal or settlers or occupiers. And it is this insistence upon the proverbial other that we are seeking to avoid and disassemble with this panel. Father Alexi Smith, the moderator of this discussion, shared with me some of the following ideas. Maybe each panelist could be asked to share what they would like the other side to understand about their position. People need to listen to one another, to hear one another, and to feel one another's pain. Another approach might be what the panelists understanding the other side's position to be, or what they would like to see after the fighting has ended, or what they would like us here to do here. As such, I would ask you to consider some of these questions. I'm aware that numerous panelists have very deep and personal connections to the crisis, some of them having lost family members due to the ongoing bloodshed. Knowing many of you personally and knowing your civil attitudes and level-headed perspectives, I'm grateful that we are holding this forum to talk about this publicly and to convey the aforementioned pain and suffering in a way that will acknowledge it, but not in a directly accusatory ad hominem way that points fingers at individuals as if they were representatives of their entire group, an unhelpful tack which puts people on the defensive and effectively shuts down communication. We are all here to share our perspectives and to work toward a solution in a way that no government or administration anywhere in the world has yet successfully accomplished. As many of you have heard me say, as faith and interfaith leaders, we are the moral compass of this world. And now is the time to exercise our power and make our voices heard, and to bring our elected officials and political leaders to accountability, and to demand peace and reconciliation. It is my hope that in addition to those in attendance today, that the tens of thousands of followers that the Islamic Center of Southern California and the Institute for Religious Tolerance, Peace, and Justice have in their networks will be watching the live stream or will be viewing a recording of this on our YouTube channels and will benefit from the wisdom shared by our panelists. I want to thank our panelists once again for their willingness to take part in this panel discussion on the crisis in Palestine and Israel. My hope is that our words will model to others what it means to listen compassionately and deeply to those who are on different ends of the spectrum from us, especially in a situation so grave as the current one. Our nation and our world have become more polarized and entrenched. With the honest testimony of each of you, we can remind people how to acknowledge our shared humanity and focus on solving issues like the one at hand, rather than retreating further into our tribalistic identities and ideologies. As such, I would once again encourage all of us to focus on the shared humanity, the shared pain, while bearing in mind that we are cousins, not so distant cousins, who should not be fighting over a shared burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg, for this powerful message. So the next section of the event will be our panel discussion with distinguished guests. Moderating this panel is Right Reverend Alexis Smith, a Greek Catholic priest who has served as ecumenical and interreligious officer of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles since November 2000. He directs the Catholic Church relations with all other faiths in Los Angeles. Additionally, he is currently serving... Oh, sorry. Is that fine? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, sorry. He is currently serving as the Catholic Association of Diocesan Ecumenical and Interreligious Officers Liaison to Christian Churches. Father Alexis served for many years as president of the Interreligious Council of Southern California and is the recipient of numerous commendations and awards. In 2011, he was elected president of the Southern California Ecumenical Council, now the Southern California Christian Forum, a post he still holds. In 2019, he received Loyola Marymount University's President Award, the highest non-degree honor given by LMU. He is currently a member of the Liturgical Commission of the Archdiocese and has been invested as a knight. Please help me join in giving a warm welcome to Father Alexis.
Thank you for that more than generous introduction. I'm going to introduce all the panelists together, and as I call your name, I invite you to come and take a seat here. Now, we'll begin with our colleague and friend, Aziza. Aziza Hassan is the executive director of New Ground, a nonprofit dedicated to bridging the divides and convening constructive conversations around challenging social issues. With over 20 years of experience in program management and coalition building, she's a skilled mediator and trainer who has facilitated multiple groups and workshops on interfaith and intercultural issues. Aziz's work has been featured in the New York Times, LA Times, NBC, ABC, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, the National Public Radio, and many other sources. She served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and the Los Angeles Civil and Human Rights Commission. She's also a prolific writer and speaker who has published several articles and curricula on peacemaking, immigration, and women's rights. Aziz's mission is to promote a culture of respect and belonging for all. I'd like to invite Rabbi Joshua Hoffman now. Rabbi Joshua Hoffman was appointed the president and the CEO of the Academy for Jewish Religion of California in October of 2022. Previously, Rabbi Hoffman had served for 18 successful years as a congregational rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom Synagogue in Encino. He serves as the immediate past president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California, played a crucial role in developing the Rabbinical Assembly strategic planning process in 2015 to 2020, and currently serves as the fundraising chair for the Zander Chaplain Community Bet Din. As an ordinee of the 5th class of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, he received prestigious awards and achieved an MA in Rabbinic Studies in 2003. He also received his MA in Education from the American Jewish University in 1999 and his BA in English and American Literature from Brandeis University in 1966. The Holiness of Doubt. Joshua's first book was published in 2023. He's married to Rabbi Becky Hoffman, who is a senior rabbi of a congregation in the San Fernando Valley. They're raising 3 children. All right. Tariq Abash is going to be joining us via Zoom. He's not here in person, but he will be joining us via Zoom. Tariq was a political appointee and political advisor to the Department of Education's Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. He worked to overhaul the broken student loan system, provide relief to millions of borrowers, and address inequities across American higher education. Tariq was the second government official and the first political appointee to resign from the Biden administration due to its policy on Gaza and unrestricted support for Israel's aggression against Palestinians. Prior to joining the government, Abash was a co-founder of the Student Borrower Protection Center, a national research and advocacy nonprofit, where he led the organization's investigative work on student loan and consumer finance policies. Mr. Abash also spent years at the Century Foundation working on higher education affordability, accountability, and consumer protection issues. He holds degrees from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the University of Miami. Rabbi Sarah Emanuel is the assistant professor of theological studies at Loyola Marymount University. She holds a PhD with distinction in biblical studies with focus on New Testament, Second Temple Jerusalem, Judaism, and the ancient Jewish Christian encounters. Her research, broadly speaking, explores the ways ancient Jewish and early Christian-centered sources have functioned since their inception, from their contents of production up through their contemporary contents of reception. To that end, she implements both traditional historical critical methodologies and contemporary critical approaches to ancient materials. Much of her work is legible through the lenses of literary and cultural studies. She is interested in how the Bible, collection of literary and cultural artifacts, creates, reflects, and responds to, and is consumed by communities of storytellers and story listeners, and how interpreters might utilize a variety of theories and methods to explore the layered modes of meaning making. Her most recent research covers the relationship between biblical interpretation, Jews, race and racism, and much of her previous work, including her first 2 books, investigates the relationship between Jewishness post-colonial theory and trauma history. As the only out lesbian Jew in the field of New Testament and one employed at a Catholic institution, I might add, she understands the feeling of loneliness and what happens to the psyche when working in a space that historically does not want you. We also had on the slide here the photograph of Rabbi Micah Miller, but unfortunately, he's experienced car trouble on the way here, and we attempted to connect with him via Zoom, but the Zoom apparently isn't working in the tow truck in which he's now riding. So unfortunately, he will not be able to join us. And then certainly, Hadab Tarifi was born in Gaza, in Palestine, and lived in Kuwait until after the first Gulf War. She moved to Los Angeles. Hadab has been active in the Muslim and interfaith communities in Southern California since 1994, working on building bridges and bringing people together. She serves on the boards of several Muslim nonprofit organizations, including the New Horizons School in Los Angeles, the Shura Council of Southern California, and Islamic Networks Group. She was elected the first chairwoman of both the Muslim Public Affairs Council in 2007 and the Islamic Center of Southern California in 2016. Hadab served and continues to serve the boards of several interfaith groups and organizations, such as the University Religious Conference at UCLA, the Los Angeles Council of Religious Leaders, and the Academy of Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies. Hadab worked as an IM program manager at General Electric for 20 years, and she's now an IT consultant and a financial coach. Let's warmly welcome those of you. Before we begin the actual panel, I'd like to take a moment of privilege here to set the tone. 2 weeks after the war began, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Pierre Batista Cardinal Isabella, addressed the Christian faithful of the Patriarchate in these words: "To have the courage of love and peace here in the Holy Land today means not allowing hatred, revenge, anger, and pain to occupy all the spaces of our hearts, of our speech, and of our thinking. It means making a personal commitment to justice, being able to affirm and denounce the painful truth of injustice and evil that surround us without letting it pollute our relationships." As Eric so eloquently said a few moments ago, we have to listen to one another. We may not like what we hear, but it's imperative that we listen to one another, that each of us is heard. We have to feel, experience the grief and anguish of the other, while not allowing that grief and that anguish to, in His Eminence's words, pollute our relationships. There's a story in the Hebrew Bible, that part of it is Christian Bible as well, about Joseph with the many-colored coat. You all know that story? The story of separation, the story of anguish. But it makes that story makes a very pointed theological statement. God could not have prevented the brothers from doing something cruel and evil, selling their brother Joseph into slavery out of jealousy for his relationship with their father. God respects our free will. God's role was to sustain Joseph, to guide him, to bring him to something good and life-affirming out of the horror inflicted upon him, which he does. And in one of the most powerful scenes of reconciliation and acknowledgement of common humanity in that scripture, after many years of separation and enmity, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers by simply saying, "I'm Joseph, your brother." Key word there is brother, as you said, cousin. I would like very much then to close my initial remarks here by sharing with you sentiments that I like very much from the writings of Abdul Baha, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. Do not be satisfied until each one with whom you are in concern is to you like a member of your family. Regard each other either as a father, brother, sister, mother, child. If you can attain to this, your difficulties will vanish and you will know what to do. All that in mind now, I ask our panelists to take, and I realize this is an impossible task, the initial round here, to take 5 to 7 minutes and share with us your perspectives on the crisis in Gaza and Israel. And I'd like to begin with Rabbi Hopkins.
We should have sat on the other side of the table. What you're saying?
That's you there.
I know. Can you all hear me okay? If I use this, I think we might need it because there's some amplification going on through the computers. I think we're all in this room because we're willfully, deliberately willing to understand how a group of collective voices, sometimes disparate voices, can respond to one of the most significant challenges that we're facing in our lifetime. And I think that it's very important for us to really begin to distinguish between that which we can control and that which is beyond our control. We can stand here with whatever expertise we possess and opine on the policies, on the rationales, on the pain and the measure of pain that is being experienced by us personally or by us in relation to those who are suffering in a place very close to us on the other side of the world. But there is so much about this that is beyond our control. And it is very important for us to know that we do not speak about that which is beyond our control. Today, what I hope we take away from this moment is exactly what brings you into this room. What can we control? Where does our responsibility begin? And we know, this group of people sitting up here, and you know in this room, that the responsibility that we can take hold of is only held hand in hand, arm interlocked, one step forward at a time. Last night, because I'm sure that you listen to the news about what's happening in Israel and Gaza as often as I do, there were over 120,000 people gathered to protest and share their voices to shake the foundations of the government, to urge the people towards ceasefire, to ask for the hostages to be released, to change the direction of the political leadership. And even after 120,000 of people who were present there, let alone the millions such as ourselves who were watching, we are not changing that. That's not our job here. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there to protest. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't share our presence. But when we're present, it means that we must share the message that is not being heard loudly enough. and therefore we do have some responsibility to take here. As Dr. Greenberg, I believe it was Dr. Greenberg, who associated a shared text between the Jewish tradition and the Muslim tradition about the significance of a single human life. To take one single human life and destroy it is to destroy an entire universe. And to save an entire single person is to save the entire universe. The sensitivity that that text brings into our midst is an animating force. In the Talmudic tradition, I wanted to add one more piece to that teaching, because it begins with another fundamental precept. It begins, first of all, in a larger conversation of how a court is responsible for issuing a verdict of a person who may or may not be convicted of a capital crime, whether or not the court has the right to impose capital punishment upon someone who has taken the life of another human being. And the teaching evolves with this first. A question: why did the source of all life and creation in the universe create one human being? Wouldn't it have been more efficient to create the entirety of humanity? And even so, to create it in that divine image, so that humanity would begin its course in existence, joined together as family. The rabbis opine that one human being was created because of the utter uniqueness that each human being possesses. They say it's like a stamp or a coin. A government can stamp coins and they can be exactly the same. And in their era, it had pictures of people. We know this in our own currency. But the Holy One who created humanity made each and every human being unique, distinguished, and filled with potential. So if there is anything that we can do in this next understanding of saving the world by saving a single soul, we must recognize the total and complete uniqueness of each and every human being. So here we are in this room, understanding that the multitudes can lift up their voices, attempt to topple the forces of power and authority that may not be consistent with our points of view. And we may be successful, or we may be focused on something even more important, which is assuring that the human dignity of each individual is uplifted, is honored, is respected. And that there's no religion that has the corner on doing that better than any other religion. And that's why today and days like this need to happen often and often again. I didn't want to go first, but I want to say one last thing. My friend and co-panelist is suffering. Her suffering is my suffering. And if we are going to move forward, I have to see her humanity as I hope she sees mine. And know that we are walking forward together, bring healing and reconciliation in ways that we only know how to do better together. Thank you very much.
Everyone hear me? No. Okay. May peace and God's blessings be upon you all. I what could one say in 5 minutes? I don't know. Here's what I do know. I know that there's nothing that really can be said. There's no words that can cover the enormous destruction, the suffering that's living in people's lives. And if there's one cost that's absolutely clear, it's that we have lost sight of the individual people. The individuals who are like Amani and Debbie, who's a 34-year-old psychotherapist who lived in Gaza up until a couple of weeks ago. She dedicated her life to helping with healing the trauma of other people, bearing witness to their suffering. She asked a friend for a favor. She said, please just help me get my family out of here. So she asked for us to set up a GoFundMe campaign. And in the midst of setting up the campaign, her tent in Rafah was bombed. And her 4 children, Firas, Hanan, Mustafa, and Amir are all gone. You can do so much and try to do everything, and it's never enough. And every prayer is so important, and yet again, it's not like the actions aren't fast enough. I'm looking around me today and I'm seeing things that say peace and justice and healing. And the truth is that you don't get to the peace, you don't get to justice, you don't get to healing until we say really hard things, until we work through the hard things and we stop the gaping wounds. We have to stop the gaping wounds. Otherwise, there is no talking. But the other piece that's really essential is that we've lost sight of people's humanity. And it's not just any people, it's individuals with real family, with real lives. And I look at these people and I see things like bodies of a 3-year-old after the most recent bombing in Rafah, and the head is gone and the body is limp. The massacre that it's just sitting so heavy and so hard, and it's hard to get through any of it. If I'm being honest with all of you, it's hard for me to get up in the mornings. It's hard for me to get up any moment. And then I look at people around me and they're still getting up. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna keep doing it because you can't give up. Because that's what it actually says in our holy text. It says, don't despair. And I have to find every amount of energy within me to pull forward and not despair. But that system of dehumanization doesn't happen on accident. It's systemic. Gaza's been walled off for a really long time. When I was I went with my brother a year and a half ago just to see where my family is from. We're from this little tiny village called Litbab, which is kind of near Ramle. And anytime you go from 1948 you go into 1967 borders, there's this massive red and white sign that says this is a dangerous area, you cannot enter. And we wintered because that was where our family had to go. We started, like, our family lives in 48, the village is gone, and now it's 1967. And anyway, we followed their world. We tried to follow their footsteps. But the point is there's all these different blocks and barriers everywhere. And that's one example of so many, over and over again. And so what does it mean for us as people of conscience, of faith, to be able to look at these really important things, these really important realities, and not look away, but to bear witness and say, okay, what can we do together? Because that's what I know of justice. Justice is people of faith coming together, or people coming together and saying, we bear witness, we see the wrong, and we're going to heal it by doing something. What I admire in the Jewish faith is this idea of teshuvah, that you actually name the harm and you work through it, but you actually have to name it and you work together. So what does it mean for us to actually work together and to address these really hard things? and to address it when we ourselves are wrong. The Quran calls on me to stand for truth, even if it's against myself or my nearest of kin or other people who are close to me. And what does that mean? I don't know what anything means anymore, but I do know this. I know that I see each of us demonizing each other in different ways throughout the day, all the time. What does it mean for us to really hold up that life is truly sacred? And if I'm saying things the way I'm saying these from a place of I really want to find a way to heal together, and you can't do it without saying the hard things. But I really do feel like Palestinian life is cheap. Like, it doesn't actually matter. It's treated like it's like, okay, well, it's a reaction to a really big, important thing that happened. And then you get into the details of the many important things that happened. I don't know. But I also know that there's people like Yechaved Lifshitz and her husband, Oded, who were taken hostage on October 7th. And they had dedicated their lives to peace. And she's now released and he's still wherever he is. She yearns for him. I think of other people who are like the faces of different rabbis that I've seen who have buried loved ones of family, of people from within their congregation. You never forget the face of grief. And then I think of people like Rada Krayim, who's like a 23-year-old first solar power engineer of Gaza. She lives with her family. There's 10 kids, and she's literally the sole provider. You can hear all of this on the New York Daily News daily podcast, as well as the other one that I mentioned. But Rada literally is the sole provider, and she took all of her prize money because she had been in all these international competitions to literally just fill her family's home with food because they knew that something was that they knew that this was going to be bad. And so they filled the house, and then they were eventually forced out of their home in northern Gaza. And they had to move 12 different times over and over and over again. Eventually, like they fled to the south, and then they made their way back up to the north because they realized that actually they weren't safer in the south anyway. So they made their way back up to the north, and what they actually found was that their home had been burned and all the food was gone. And so they just tried to make ends meet by taking feed, like livestock feed, like animal feed, like rabbit food, and grinding it as far as they possibly can, and mixing it with whatever they can, sometimes cornstarch, sometimes water. I mean, water is an essential part of the ingredient, but sometimes flour, and that's how they make their food. I think of all these people that I keep hearing about, and I come back to Amani. Amani talked about her 13-year-old son, who she watched over the last several months literally change his dream and stop talking about it. He wanted to become a lawyer. He had dreams, and eventually that his only dream was to survive, was to make it through each moment, that he was terrified through everything. I think of a future and what it could actually be like if we actually put our shoulders together and said, enough is enough. Enough is enough. We must stand up as people of faith and help each other, not just see one another, but actually help right the wrongs towards everyone in the equation. And yes, it's going to be hard work. But a shared liberation can't exist without it.
Hi, hear me? Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I just want to point out I may be taking cough drops as I speak. I'm not sick. I don't have COVID. I got back last night from taking students abroad in Spain, and my asthma kicked in for the end of the trip. And I'm a cough asthmatic, not a wheeze asthmatic, so the coughing is not COVID, it is my asthma. So just wanted you to be comfortable with that. I also, this may come as a disappointment, I'm not a rabbi. I'm a professor, and that may come across in what I'm about to say. So one of the things we were asked to share is what we might hope for those in this room to know or to think about in this conversation. And that first one I'm about to share may seem disparate, but I hope that it will come together at the end of my 5 minutes. This may come as no surprise based on my the introduction, but I exist in political spaces on the left. That's where I live. Happy Pride. And within those spaces on the left, there's a lot of anti-Zionist rhetoric. In queer spaces where I often feel most at home, there's a lot of anti-Zionist rhetoric. And so my hope for today is for us to think about the vast array of perspectives within Judaism. I'm also Jewish. So the nuances within Jewishness, and for us to maybe think or question the nuances within this term that's being thrown around right now. It's almost reminding me of 1920s USSR Zionism. So I want to provide some context. Again, this may seem disparate at first, it will come together. I was born in Las Vegas in 1987. The reason that I give this date is for us to keep in mind that I'm born into a world in which a modern state of Israel exists. I'm also born into a world in which Holocaust memory has already become American memory. The pain of the Holocaust, in particular the pain of Jews in the Holocaust, is a trauma that has been given a voice. So I'm born into a world in which Jewish Holocaust trauma is a given, it's known. People know it and people hear it. I am not Israeli. I do not have family in Israel. I grew up going to Hebrew school from preschool onward, but I really don't remember Israel being discussed much at all. I remember there being an Israeli flag in hindsight on the bima or at the front of the congregation. I don't think I connected the dots though, that was a flag of a modern nation state. I think I just thought it was a Jewish flag. So I was not raised with a particular narrative about this modern state called Israel. In fact, my mother is from Italy. Italy was our second home. That was the place that we had pride for Italy. That's how I was raised. And I also really wasn't raised in a theistic home. I'm a humanist Jew. I'm not a faith-based Jew, but I care very much about humanity and humans around me, and I'm very much culturally Jewish and caring for the other within that cultural Jewishness. So I kind of want that to be known, so you understand the perspective from which I'm coming, and you understand that not all Jews are raised with a particular idea about this place that's inaccurate. Much of my scholarship, yes, is on Bible, and some folks may have questions about that, like, can I prove that Jews are really indigenous to this ancient land based on the Bible? We can go there or not. Sure, the word Jew comes from Judah, and sure, ancient Israelites and early Jews experienced expulsion time and time again. However, there were always other people there, always. There are still other people there. Something that I also study is post-colonial theory and trauma theory. I spend a lot of my time in the world of trauma and recovery, and the first step in trauma and recovery is to be able to speak. It's to be able to speak your pain and speak it again, scream it again safely. And so this is going to go back to one of the first things I said. I was born into a world in which it was safe for me to talk about the Holocaust. It was American memory. It was known. It was safe. And I don't think that everyone experiences that safety to be able to speak and speak again. I just got back from Spain with 20 undergraduate students. On the one hand, you could say it was intercultural and interfaith, and on the other hand, you can't. It was half Jews, half Christians, on many different, many different varieties of Jews and Christians. I don't know of any other students of another background, no Muslim students, for example. And I'm sad about that. A lot of time was spent talking about the pain of Jews throughout history, the racialization of Jews throughout history, not just in terms of modern race science, but pre-modern understandings of race and racism and the dehumanization of Jews. There were also Israelis on the trip talking about their pain, talking about people they know who are hostages, talking about people they know who were killed, peace activists who were killed. And as someone trained in trauma, I sit and I listen. And I want to give them voice to speak and speak it again. However, I want to also say that I'm worried that in spaces on the left, again, it's all starting to come together. I exist in spaces on the left that were really different from my trip to Spain. And there was a lot of voices for Jews and Jewish suffering and Israeli suffering. My spaces on the left, happily, there are spaces to speak the pain of Palestinians. Many of my colleagues and friends are in the encampments and support the encampments. I don't know if people on my Spain trip and my colleagues and friends in the encampments will talk to one another. And that's my fear. I think that I agree very much with Dr. Eric Greenberg that pain needs to be able to be spoken and spoken again. I do think historically certain voices have been heard over others. I don't think the answer, however, is to silence pain. It's not going to work. I'll sort of end with this. I exist in such circles on the left that the pain of Palestinians is that the response that Hamas had, and in some of my circles is very much justified as resistance. And theoretically, intellectually, I can even go there. I know what can happen to the psyche. That's why I put it in my bio. I know what can happen to the psyche when you aren't given space. I'm just worried that we've entered a world in which persons are talking to one another, and I hope that if we can understand the depth of humanity and the nuances of humanity on the side of Hamas, can we do it for Israelis? I don't know. I'm posing this question. I'm posing it. I'm not pretending to have an answer. And I'll end with another question. When one says they're anti-Zionist, this is again another question. I'm really curious to know what we mean by that. Does that mean that the modern state of Israel shouldn't exist at all? Or does that mean that the modern state of Israel shouldn't exist in the way that it does? Many people ask, am I a Zionist? And my honest answer depends on what time period are we talking about? Where am I? Who am I? I have much more questions than I have answers. I just want to end by saying thank you for speaking. I think Palestinian pain needs to be heard more.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Right now?
How's this? Can you hear me okay? I can be louder if that's helpful.
That's perfect.
Cool. Okay, thank you so much first for the accommodation of being here virtually. I'm really thankful to be part of such a thoughtful collection of panelists, experts in their own rights, and also just a respectful group of interfaith leaders. I think it's so important to have these kinds of conversations. So I personally want to thank Dr. Eric Greenberg for suggesting doing this panel, for reaching out, and for Father Lexi just for moderating this. For those who don't know me, my name is Tarek Habash. I'm a Palestinian American, but I descend from generations of Palestinian Christians, and the reality is that my identity in itself can be an inconvenient reality for how the decades-long conflict between Palestinians and Israelis has existed, because so often in the West, so often in the United States, the idea that even diversity across Palestinians exists is not something that is discussed. It's not something that's known. And my family for generations lived in what is now modern day Israel, but my grandparents and aunts and uncles grew up in the city of Jaffa on the coast. And in 1948, like so many other Palestinian families, were forcibly expelled from their homes. They lost everything they had. My grandparents actually had just built their new home within a year and a half of being forced to evacuate. They lost all of their belongings, so much of their clothing, so many of their fine china that they had that they would eat from, and they had to leave. They had nowhere to go unless they wanted to be safe, and so they walked for dozens of miles across the country in search of refuge. My dad was born as a refugee, and that's my family's reality, and the reality of how that affects generations of Palestinians who grow up experiencing that familial trauma, living in the diaspora, is that this is not grounded in religion. This is not about a ongoing war that is based in our faiths. This is about land, it's about power, and it's about the continued oppression of an entire group of people, regardless of what their beliefs are. And that is really unfortunate that it is not talked about often enough. And for so long, it was not something that I felt safe talking about here in the United States, where I am, for all intents and purposes, extremely safe as an American. My parents moved here to give myself and my siblings an opportunity to grow up and thrive in a safe environment where we could experience the American dream. But what is happening now in Gaza, in Palestine, in Israel, is the continued violence that we see and that we are experiencing ourselves here in the United States, in a way that is against our beliefs, whether we are Jewish, whether we are Christian, or whether we are Muslim. And I think it's so important to talk about how we so often resort to fear, resort to hate in spaces where we need to be comfortable having difficult conversations about why we have to rely on those things instead of relying on our faith, relying on how we were raised. I mentioned that I grew up as in a Christian household. I descended from generations of Palestinian Christians. My dad and his family grew up as Orthodox Christians. My mom grew up as a Lutheran Christian. And for me, that faith was a really important aspect of my life. It was important for me to understand how my identity, both as a Palestinian and as a Christian, was really important for how I was going to walk this world, how I was going to interact with people. I was raised that, you know, I was raised under the Christian tenets that it is blessed to be gentle, it's blessed to be meek, it's blessed to be a peacekeeper. Like these are ways that I try to live my life. And so through my work, through my daily conversations, this was how I approached my work in the federal government as an appointee of the Biden administration. And unfortunately, for so much of that work, what I experienced, particularly post October 7th, was an unwillingness to recognize my personal identity as both a Palestinian and a Christian, but also as a human, and the unwillingness to extend humanity and empathy for Palestinians who were working tirelessly to support the administration's agenda and work. And in fact, to obfuscate what our identity was, I was not the only Palestinian in the government. There are certainly many of us. And the reality was that the administration, despite all of that, did not want to have real conversations about what we as an American government were doing to support the continued violence against Palestinians in Gaza. And the reality that we continue to see is that there is so much harm and so much violence that is against our beliefs, regardless of whether we are thinking about our beliefs through our American values of supporting freedom and democracy, or if it's our beliefs as people of faith. And for me, that was really, really difficult to continue to do both the work that I was doing, but also to have real conversations with people who I worked with, who I respected very deeply, because it was hard for me to understand if people valued me as an individual anymore. And that was extremely, extremely hard to do that. And so since then, what I've tried to do is to emphasize the humanity of who we are as Palestinians. But I think it's also important to understand the history of our families, of our people as Palestinians, to understand that this has been an ongoing cycle of occupation and violence against Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, dating back to 1948. And this is a systemic level of discrimination that unfortunately continues to escalate, that continues to show itself through violence in ways that Palestinians continue to be treated as inferior people, as dehumanized individuals who are less deserving of being treated with equality. And I think as we are having these really difficult conversations, it is really important to recognize the humanity of all of us, whether we are Palestinian, whether we are American, whether we are Israeli, we are all human. And I think we have to lead with that as we are having these difficult conversations, but we also have to recognize the imbalance and the inequity that has persisted for decades. And we have to stop that from being the starting point, because if we are talking about how do we move forward from here, how do we ensure long-term peace for all people and prosperity for all people, we can't presume that one group of people is more deserving of something than another, or that there needs to be a prioritization for one group of people over another. I think we have to provide opportunities for both Palestinians and Israelis to live peacefully in their land that they both have a claim and an ability to, some sort of tie to that land. But at the same time, we have to provide self-determination for those people. And we as Americans can support and facilitate that potentially, but we have to get out of the way sometimes too and allow for them to have real dialogue about what that looks like. And unfortunately, that has to happen diplomatically. That has to happen through conversations. That cannot happen through violence. And what we have enabled for the last 8 months as Americans has been the continuation of violence instead of finding real ways for diplomatic efforts to move forward. And that's led to extremely, excessively high levels of destruction for Palestinian civilians, for children, for families, for doctors, for journalists, for humanitarian workers, and that has to stop. We have to find ways to stop that. And as people of faith, I think that we have to recognize that it's our obligation to call out our leaders in whatever way that we can. It reminds me of a story from the Bible that I think many people are probably familiar with, when Jesus went into the temple and he saw how people were making deals in the temple, and he turned over the tables and he called out the people of power. And he said, this is not how we conduct ourselves. And I think that it is our responsibility as people of faith to call out people in power and tell them this is not acceptable. This is against our beliefs. This is against our values, and stand up for what's right, which is peace, which is ensuring a real path to peace and ensuring humanity is recognized across the board for Palestinians as well.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for the introduction. You got to know me through my bio. I'd like to get to know a little bit about you, the audience. So it's the fact that you're here and you marched for peace and justice. How many of you get your information and news mainly from U.S. media? Raise your hand, please.
U.S. media.
Okay. How many of you made a public position calling for ceasefire or marched calling for ceasefire? Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Josh, for your kind thoughts. I really appreciate that. A little bit about myself. I guess you all know that I was born in Gaza, but I have a connection to Tarek because I am originally from Jaffa. This is where my father, God rest his soul, is from. And in 1948, along with his family, they were ethnically cleansed, not forced out, ethnically cleansed out of Jaffa because people were massacred in the center of Jaffa. For decades, Israel denied such a massacre until a few years where the mass grave was found. So my father with his family went to Gaza. I call it Gaza because that's the Arabic name for it. And good, I'm glad we finally agree on something. And that's where he met my mom, and that's where I was born. So basically, I was made a refugee before I was born. And I lived as a refugee until I chose to come to the US to make the US my home, hoping and thinking that it is the land of the free, and that I would be able to exercise my right as a human being. But sadly, I'm learning a lot of things in those 30+ years that I have lived here. For 32 years, I have been participating in interfaith dialogue and building bridges and hoping to build a better community right here in LA. And I built friendship, I have friends, we both read together, we spoke, we marched, we did so many things calling for peace. Until October 7th happened. And everything and everywhere in this city, in this country, was we stand with Israel. We stand with Israel became the new God that everybody are praying for. No mention of Palestinians. Yes, it was mentioned that I lost family members. I literally lost count after the 150 mark. Each and every one of them have a story. Each and every one of them is loved. I can only tell you two of the stories. Adam, my cousin's eldest son. They couldn't even find his body. He had to collect pieces so that they could bury him after he was gone in the house where he was, after he fled the city of Gaza. Literally, they couldn't find his body. He was blown into pieces, like so many of the Palestinians in Gaza. My other cousin, Yusuf, he's married to my cousin Mariam. He's a prominent dentist in Gaza. And after how many months of being displaced one time after the other, he was on my list of the GoFundMe. And I was supposed to be. Except he couldn't make it. Because Israel decided to target his father, who was a prominent pediatric surgeon, one who started the Department of Pediatric Surgery at the Shifa Hospital. As Israel targeted all doctors, targeted all signs of civilization in Gaza. The doctors, the hospitals, the schools. And the list is on and on. Hospitals, we're not alone. Mosques, churches. There was no safe space for anybody to be in Gaza. But it didn't really start on October 7th. For anybody who thinks that Hamas attacked Israel, and how dare they? After 75 years of colonization, occupation, dehumanization of Palestinians, and 17 plus years of siege of Gaza, where Gazans had no control over anything in their life. They've had no control on the air, on the land, on the borders, on the sea. They couldn't do anything. Talking about concentration camp, Gaza was worse than a concentration camp. And if everybody hear that it is Israel against Hamas, Hamas is not in the West Bank. Yet what is happening in Jenin, all over the West Bank, is nothing less. In Jenin, particularly Jenin. Jenin looks like a twin sister of Gaza. Check the news. Definitely not US, but the news is out there. I appreciate this opportunity for us to come and talk together. But I tell you, after 32 years of my life that I devoted to the city, to the interfaith, to coming together, to building bridges, to building relationships, not a single interfaith body that I served on came out and called for ceasefire. Thank God for Eric, after 5 months in February, a statement came out, and I appreciate that. Better late than never. I'll meet you anywhere at any time, as long as you come to the fact that we need a ceasefire. You cannot tell me, thank you. You cannot tell me that you are true to your faith Just as Eric mentioned. Eric, you mentioned Zach, you mentioned Rabbi Sharon Brous. None of them came out and called for ceasefire publicly. In private, I have no clue. In my conversation with Zach and I asked him, his answer was complicated. There's nothing complicated about calling for protecting of lives. Not just Palestinian lives, but Israeli lives as well. The hostages who came out alive only came out during a ceasefire, which tells you who is really interested in them coming out alive or not. But that's another story. So when we say sharing pain, sharing humanity, I'm not really sure what does that mean. Those of you who stood for ceasefire, those of you who marched, and those of you who spoke, we have shared humanity. But those who didn't, I'm not sure we do. Because if we don't stand for one another, if we do not really, not just talk, because talk is cheap, if we're not really standing for our faith and taking action to protect lives, then we're not being true to the God Almighty who created us and gave us these commandments. And I wonder how we will all stand in front of God at the day of judgment and answer that. Doing the minimum is good, but doing the minimum is not good enough when already 82,600 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, injured, 36,500 have been killed, more than 15,000 children, 10,000 plus are missing, not counting those who were arrested, taken hostage into Israel. And as of this morning, the news came out that about 36 of them, 360 of them have died. Really? Died? Just died? Not tortured and killed? And I don't want to even get into the numbers of those. And yet we're watching all this in real time. The excuse the world had about the Holocaust is that we didn't know. We really didn't know. This is why no one lifted a finger. Well, what is happening in Gaza is happening in real time. Anyone and everyone has a phone. And the information is out there. That's why Israel is trying to suppress and kill all journalists so that nothing comes out. They're not allowing international journalists to go in. And it is interesting that from hearing from everybody, once I heard the word genocide. Why? Why? Do you agree that what is happening in Gaza is genocide? If you do,
Yes.
please raise your hand.
For sure.
God bless you. Thank you, because it is. It is a genocide. We are to protect the life. Jews lived in Palestine. My father, God rest his soul, used to tell me about the story when he lived in Jaffa, where his neighbor to the right, who he used to call uncle, was a Palestinian Christian. Probably thought his grandfather. And his neighbor to the left, who he still used to call uncle, was a Palestinian Jew. But that all changed with the Zionist movement. And we can discuss, Zionism at a later time, because the definition that probably the Jews or the Israelis have, because not all Jews agree on that definition, their definition of Zionism is totally different from mine. Zionism is a colonial movement to take over Palestine.
Yes.
And while Jews have the right to live in Palestine, and they will and would be protected as they were, because the whole world rejected the Jews when they escaped Europe. Even this country didn't allow them to come down the ships at Staten Island. And the one country that welcomed them is Palestine. And yet Palestinians are paying the price. For what? For being kind? For being welcoming? The point that keeps coming in those discussions, regarding Israel, Israel has the right to defend itself. No, Israel does not have the right to defend itself. Not my word. Not my word. It is the international law. The international law states that an occupier is responsible for the safety and the well-being of the occupied.
That's right.
Israel doesn't really care. Does Israel really care about any of the international laws? No, it doesn't. Israel doesn't even care about the laws of this country. How many times did our president come out and said, we're asking, we're demanding, we're this, we're that? And what does the Israeli government say? We don't really care. Just give us the money, give us the weapons, and shut up. And this is where we have the responsibility to take action. Being silent is being complicit in this genocide. We have to speak out. We have to call for ceasefire. And we have to take a stand to really revisit what we call as the interfaith dialogue. I remember back in 2021, during COVID, I remember, there were attacks on Gaza, as always, almost every year, every Ramadan. I braced myself because Gaza would be attacked and Gaza would be demolished. And there were demonstrations all over the world, including right here in the city of LA. And it was in the news where some demonstrators, supposedly carrying the Palestinian flag, attacked some Jews on the streets of LA, and there was an uproar. I stood next to the mayor, next to all the city officials and the interfaith, and I condemned violence, whether here on the streets of LA or violence in Gaza, violence in Jerusalem. And everybody pushed for it to be tried as a hate crime. And then nothing happened. We really didn't hear about it until a couple of years later. There was actually an article in a Jewish newspaper or a Jewish news outlet, and it did mention that charges were dropped. It was the Jews who were the instigators, and the Palestinians, those with the Palestinian flag, were protecting themselves. And everything dropped. But not a single mention in the media. Same media that had an uproar. So yes, as Aziza mentioned, Palestinian lives don't matter. I marched with all of you, with all the faith leaders, calling for protecting our fellow Black. We all marched and we said, Black lives matter. We counted the seconds George Floyd was with the policeman his knee on George Floyd's neck. We all did that together. We all stood and we all said, enough is enough. I didn't see that happen to the genocide in Gaza. All of the groups that I have spent 32 years of my life working with, none of them came out and publicly said, let's march. Let's go knock on the mayor's office or knock on City Hall, all together as people of faith. That didn't happen. I almost lost faith, literally lost faith in my interfaith work. So God Almighty sent me a group in Pasadena. We call ourselves now Pasadena for Palestine. Different groups, different faiths. We come together as family, children, youth, men, women, all ages. And we all come together every Monday. We've been doing that from mid-October till today, rain or shine. We come together and we say, enough And we call for ceasefire, we call for end of occupation, and we call for end of the genocide. Israel will not heed, will not listen to anyone in the world because really they think they are over and above everything. If they think they are over and above our own president, when our own president tells them, enough, don't enter Rafah, don't do this, don't do that. And yet the day after our president came out and presented the so-called Israeli / Netanyahu's deal, what does Israel do? Go to Rafah, that is condensed with people. And what do? They bomb Rafah with the same weapons that Biden said, we're not sending them. They burned Palestinians alive in their tents. That's what Israel is. So what will get this genocide to end? Only Biden can do it, by the way. Except maybe before Biden God, and I'm still waiting for that miracle. Believe me, I have conversations with God on a daily basis. And I'm still waiting for this miracle. But God is testing us. And God gave us the opportunity, which sadly, you all failed. Not all of us, some of us. You know, those of us who came and spoke, we did our best and may God accept. But those who sat thinking they're doing their best and not coming out and calling for ceasefire publicly to their congregation, of their own, we failed that opportunity. So, how do I end? We are entering the 9th month of this genocide. Just imagine, 9th month. And at the beginning, pain consumed me, but I couldn't even mourn my family. It was happening so fast that I couldn't even sit with myself and mourn my family. And week after week, not a single week passed without someone being killed. My pain became anger. My anger can go around the world multiple times. But I pray and I seek refuge in God that my anger does not turn into hate, which can easily happen. I am yet to see people of faith and my fellow Jews condemn the hate that I see coming out of Israel. When settlers protected by the Israeli army stand at the border, Rafah, preventing aid trucks from entering Gaza. Not only that, but burning those aid trucks. While people in Gaza are facing man-made forced starvation. And yet, not a single condemnation. Why? Back to what Aziza said. Obviously, Palestinian lives don't matter. And when people call me and tell me, Hidab, we really feel for you. We want to come and give you our condolences. I said, it doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's not about my feelings. It's about the people in Gaza who are being massacred. Don't do anything for me. I don't want you to do anything for me. I want you to take a stand for the people who really need you and need your voice and need your position to call for a ceasefire, call for an end to the occupation, call for an end to this genocide. But I do believe when doors close, other doors open. If there is hope for the interfaith, if there is hope for the peace of and justice, we have to switch it first for it to say justice and peace, because peace will not be attained without justice first. So far, we've been dancing around the world, the word peace, without even giving it a definition. My definition of peace probably is different than Josh, different than Aziza, and different from each and every one of you. We probably need to go back to the drawing table, back to basics, and the basics of what God Almighty had ordained on all of us. Let's be true to our faith by action, not by words. Thank you and God bless.
For a very spirited discussion. Do we have questions from anyone?
Well, I wanna, if you.
Yes,
know,
now.
I-
Yes, exactly. Oh. In the meantime.
Thank you for that. I just want to say a couple things. One, I'm going to start by saying thank you. And two, I think there's a fundamental thing where we perhaps disagree with. I don't think talk is cheap. I don't think what you said is cheap. And calling for ceasefire requires speech. So I don't think talk is cheap. I think talk can change systems. Yes, action is required, but you have to speak first. Second, I ask as we move forward in this conversation and beyond this conversation to please avoid using the definite article in front of an entire people. That is how we kill each other. Please don't say the Jews. Please don't say the Palestinians. Please don't say the. That is how we die. And finally, I want to say one more thing, and I learned this from a Palestinian student on my campus. She responded so brilliantly to a post-October conversation hosted by Jewish Studies, which I'll get into that another time. Her question was, it was so good. She asked the same question, why are you not saying genocide right now? And she had her own response. She said, I wonder, might we have different definitions of genocide? Could that be how we're arriving at different, might our definitions be different? Might our definition, you even said we might have different definitions of Zionism.
Genocide is genocide.
Exactly.
She put, but what is Zionism? How are we defining it? And you might say genocide is genocide, and another person might say, oh, that's really interesting. I had this definition in my head when I was speaking. And so I just wonder if moving forward, we might be open enough to ask each other, okay, when you say that, please explain to me how you are meaning it so I can better understand.
There's a
Where you're right.
Yeah, there's a legal. I was asked the question. Yeah. I was asked the question, then let me answer. And by the way, I do encourage you to find, unfortunately, I forgot his name, but I was watching him about 2 days ago. He is a Holocaust survivor, he's a Jewish lawyer, and he was interviewed, and he basically said what is happening, what Israel is doing to Gaza is genocide. And he quoted the international law that we're supposed to all abide by. And he said the starvation, the preventing of the aid coming in, weaponizing food literally, and then he talked about the bombing, the mass bombing, the tons of bombs that are used in areas that is massively condensed by Palestinians, and the aim is to mass kill. That is genocide. So don't take my word, go to the definition, the international law. And since we're talking international law, I encourage you to search for the basic declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, 1948. There were 35 basic rights, okay, that was supposed to apply to everybody. I encourage you to research that, read it. Not a single one applies to Palestinians or the state of Israel. The one thing that I agree with is let's not paintbrush everybody with the same, okay? Jews, I respect them. I love them. I'm supposed to protect them as a Muslim. The Jews that are killing my people, those are my enemy. Those that are killing my people, like Netanyahu and his group, and the settlers, the Jewish settlers that are burning, massacring, killing, stealing people's homes in Palestine. Those are my enemies. But the Jew, and I will mention her name, Tara. 9 months ago, I didn't know Tara. Now, every single day, he doesn't call me, she texts me. How are you, Hita? How are you holding up? What can I do for you? This one is not just a Jew I know. This one is my sister.
Thank you. A couple of questions I believe we've already dealt with, but perhaps others would like to join in. How can we work to dispel these misconceptions and build more accurate understandings of each other? You want to tackle that? How can we work to dispel these misconceptions? Josh.
I'll just take a first start. This is a panel presentation and we're sharing ideas, so the real work is not going to happen here. And I think that it's really important because this is a moment of declaration and we're not able to really engage in dialogue. And I think, let me just add, when we take a test of the room and says who agrees with this and who agrees with that, and there wasn't consensus, that's a very good, clear understanding of the way that we move forward is to work on building consensus. And we cannot build consensus by making claims and having them advanced as fact without having them be discussed, debated, perhaps changed and redefined, if you're willing to be open to that. And I love what Aziza said. There is built into the system in Jewish life the potential for correction. It is one of the powerful, motivating, maybe unique and distinct contributions of Jewish values that is brought into the world, is this capacity to change one's direction. If we're going to move forward, we have to know that maybe we need to figure out which direction we're moving towards together first and foremost, and then where we go. There matters.
I mentioned the incident back in 2021. And at that time, I raised the red flag. I raised the red flag at that time that we as interfaith community have to come together and have a discussion about Palestine as well. And enough sweeping it under the carpet and calling it that it's a conflict over there. And I said that it impacts our lives here in the city, in the country. And I said, if we don't come to a consensus, how we can come and make a collective or at least an agreed on position, that there will come a time when we will be facing what we're facing now. All the work that was done pretty much in jeopardy because we're not in agreement. And we scheduled meetings. I was in attendance of all these meetings. We met with the Jewish Federation, we met with the Anti-Defamation League. We had a discussion after discussion after discussion, and then guess what? Discussions done. Or actually, let me rephrase, killed. Why killed? Because there was no agreement. When the Palestinians are being dehumanized and the other side is not willing to acknowledge their right for existence, their right to the land, their right to live peacefully and freely from the river to the sea, then how can we call for a one-state solution? We have to agree on the basics first before we build. You have to build the foundation before you build the house. Otherwise, it's the house of cards. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this gets back to my comment on definitions. I'm not coming to a conclusion. I'm really curious. When I hear from the river to the sea, I wonder, what does that mean? What does that mean for you?
That's one question. My right, you said you don't live there, okay? And you've never been there.
No, I've been there.
Okay, so when you go, you are free to move, you are free to do whatever. I'm not even allowed to go. That's it, that's my case. That's what it means.
As you.
We don't have equal rights. I
I know that.
Well, this is what I did. I was born there and I am not allowed to go. I was born there and I'm not allowed to go. And if I go, I'm not allowed the same freedom as she does.
That's right.
And she wasn't even born there. That's what I mean about equal rights from the river to the sea, that I can move from the Mediterranean all the way to the Dead Sea freely without being checkpoint, without having to be stripped naked and humiliated at a checkpoint, without being denied my identity as a Palestinian. That's what I mean.
I agree. Of course, Evie,
You asked me what it means and I just shared with you what it means.
It's embarrassing not to agree. Of course, I agree. My question about your definition is I think sometimes some Jews might wonder if that term might mean the eradication of Israelis who just happen to be born there. So I'm not just asking a question of definition. I'm not just agreeing with your right.
Tariq would like to answer.
More than me.
Tariq would like to answer.
But did I?
Tariq would like.
I'll come back to you, Father. Thank you. One moment.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that because I've heard this argument many times that like in some cases people feel threatened by the phrase, and I guess part of me wants, I think it's important to have a dialogue about language and how language can be, misinterpreted or misunderstood, because I have a lot of Palestinian family. I know a lot of Palestinians, both who, still live in the region and who live in the diaspora. And anytime that phrase is used by Palestinians, I don't know anyone who thinks about it as an intention to create any sort of violence or harm towards other people. It's simply that Palestinians have lived in unequal circumstances for decades, and the desire is just to have freedom and self-determination, like so many other Palestinians that live in the diaspora. Like, I can't move back there. I've never lived there. I was born here in the United States, but my parents who were born there can't move back there. My grandma has the key to her house that she was forced to leave, and she cannot go back to that home. And there were settlers who did move into her home and who do get to live there and have their families live there, and their families can immigrate there if they choose, but she cannot, and our families cannot. And so the idea that that our language can be misinterpreted because of someone else's feelings, I understand that people feel concerned about language, but I think it's really important to call out when that is an internalized fear versus the intention of the people and how they are using that language, because I think it justifies the further dehumanization of Palestinians, what their intentions are and who they are. I think that weaponization of language is really dangerous for Palestinians, and I think it can also be dangerous for Jewish people, both in Israel and here in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. Several of these questions would take a seminar in themselves to answer. I'm just going to state some of them and then perhaps plant some seeds and Eric's agenda for future gatherings. What do you see as the main obstacles in achieving peace between Israelites and Palestinians? What are maybe some of the historical precedences that led to this situation? We could spend days talking about it. But I'd like to ask this question. Other questions about the two-state solution and all of these things. What role do youth play in peacemaking efforts, and how can they be used more effectively and engaged?
My bet is on the youth. And it is disheartening, really disheartening, to see the politicians, the businesses, the universities are taking a hard line against the youth. Those encampments, those groups of students who were making demonstrations, I know because they join me every Monday. One of the students from Colombia joined us in Pasadena last Monday. Those are coming from all perspectives of life. Many of them Jews, many of them coming as Jews, saying that the lessons we learned from the Holocaust, that never again means never for everybody, not just for the Jews. Those are the ones that I'm betting on that will change. Will change the world, will change the status quo. And sadly, we have a government, Biden all the way down, who almost wanted to send the National Guard on them. But yet they came down and sent the little police on them, which is not acceptable. We needed to support them. We should support them. The students and the youth proved to be correct throughout history.
Yeah.
They're the one who caused the Vietnam War to end. And God willing, they're the one who are going to cause genocide to end and the freedom for Palestinians and the end of the occupation.
With respect, there is much that I disagree with Hida. And there is universal agreement in the bet that I am willing to make with every amount of currency in my wallet to place on the youth. Because right now, even on the college campuses, all we're seeing is the failure that we, the adults in the room, have not sufficiently educated our children to confront these very challenging situations with the tools we know they're gonna need in order to succeed. So the challenge is more than a bet, is to work tirelessly with great devotion, sometimes putting aside our own hurt because we know that tomorrow has to be better than today, to ensure that, and God forbid, we think of a future where a problem like this emerges again, the conflict, the degradation of human beings, the diminishment of identity that we fight so hard to preserve and protect with our work. If we cannot create a place for that to be confronted and addressed together, we will only be complicit in perpetuating the violence and the hatred and the separation that exists. So, my friend, with great respect, let's get to work, because I like your bet. But let's go, so let's put our bet on the table and figure out how we're going to make sure that the youth have everything they need to succeed.
Finding their way, by the way. They are finding their way.
I think the youth done a lot of work with you. Please comment on it.
At the youth show up in most extraordinary ways. And it's kind of to your point about how adults, how we failed them. I watched student after student, whether they were like inside the encampment and then the parents demonstrating on the outside, on the opposite side of the encampment. And the enormous pain that they have like worked through and continue to work through. I've watched them show up and mushroom all over the nation and help people bring back the essence of what was almost dying down, to remind us all that we all need to stand for something bigger than ourselves, that justice is deserving of everyone, and that life is not just a value, it's something that we truly believe in and we cherish and we protect and we hold dear. And so when I think about the youth, I think of so many different people who have been just saying, stop looking the other direction. Wherever it is, stop looking the other direction. Youth who have told me, you know, it's one thing to talk about the people who have been killed, and they're, like Dad mentioned, so many, 36 10,000. Something more. But amputations are becoming commonplace in Gaza. They're becoming commonplace when they're not always necessary, but they have to be because of what they have at the current time. Or the 25,000 orphans who have been made. 25,000 kids without their parents. Those are youth. We're going to deserve and need every ounce of love that we can send their way, that we can nurture them with, and find ways to help and support them. And so as we continue to mentor and also have them help us become our better selves when we fail, I hope that we all take the call to do good, to act, to do things that matter and that will make a difference in the days that come, and that we don't forget about the enormous trauma that we all have to invest in helping.
Yeah. So I spoke a little bit about how I worked at the Department of Education, and my portfolio was exclusively higher education, creating opportunities for students to be successful. And after October 7th, I think we had so many conversations about how to ensure that we were creating safe environments for students to learn, to thrive, to have difficult conversations. And unfortunately, what I came to realize was that the administration was not willing to take the necessary steps to have difficult conversations with university leaders. So I think, like many of my colleagues here on this panel, the reality is that the adults in the room have failed our students. We have been failing our youth, and they've taken it upon themselves to say, enough is enough. We know right from wrong. You guys taught us that much, but you're not willing to step out and actually use your collective power, to use your voices, to use your institutions to ensure the safety of humanity. And I think what students are trying to do is figuring out ways to do that in a safe, in a respectful way. And you know what? Maybe they aren't perfect at it, but I think that they, by and large, are trying to do these things in nonviolent ways. They are trying to get creative. They are being innovative. They are finding spaces to be able to continue to learn from each other, to be respectful with each other, and to have these difficult types of conversations. And I think we have to encourage that. We have to support them. We have to meet them where they are. We have to ensure that we encourage that type of dialogue every single day. And I think that, unfortunately, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really hard for us to have those conversations because we always don't agree. We always don't have a consensus in the rooms that we are in. But we have to be willing to accept the reality that we aren't always going to agree about what the right path forward is. And we have to trust that we all have the best intentions about finding ways to support each other. But that means that we have to recognize each other's humanity. We have to be able to have and engage in conversations. We can't assume what people mean with the words that they are using, and we have to give them space to be able to express themselves. And we have to make sure that we protect that speech, that we protect the institutions that allow for those difficult conversations, because what is happening right now, today, in front of us, is that there are efforts to try and undermine how we can have these conversations, what language can and can't be used, even if it's difficult to have those conversations. And we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to step in things in the wrong way, but we have to make sure that we're trying to create as much of an opportunity to learn from each other so that we aren't prohibiting these conversations from allowing us and our youth to grow now and in the future. And I think that's a really, really important point, that we have to protect the spaces so that these conversations can happen before we can't have them at all.
Thank you.
I certainly agree with all that has been said. And again, I mean, there's very few things that I'll be really sort of firm on. I'm very comfortable in changing my mind and fluidity and learning more and learning more. Every sentence I said has had 5 qualifications going on in the back of my mind and even deconstructions in the back of my mind. But I want to go back to, again, it was a student who responded to me saying, maybe we're coming to a different conclusion because we are thinking of a term differently or a phrase differently. So I want to just reiterate that I think we need to trust each other when we're in conversation. If someone is saying to me, this is what I mean by this phrase, this is what I mean by when I say from the river to the sea, I'm going to trust you. And so I hope that vice versa, someone might trust me if in a particular moment or conversation, I might have, and I'm horrified by a definition of Zionism that is as you say, that's horrific. It's awful. But I hope that perhaps if we were in conversation and I say, in this sentence, I have a different definition of Zionism. So please trust me in this sentence, I'm thinking of it differently. So if I'm going to trust you on a meaning of a phrase, I hope you might be open to trusting me on a definition of a phrase. And again, that goes back to a Palestinian student's plea.
I really appreciate what you're bringing in. I think something was brought up earlier. I think it's essential for us to be able to continue to talk and unpack instead of silencing one another or just trying to close out the conversation and move on, but instead actually go into what it means. So Zionism's come up a number of times. That's why I'm speaking to it now. I've heard so many different folks say, Zionism means, and that Jews should be able to define Zionism on their own terms because it was part of a Jewish movement. I want to say really clearly, like here's some of the things that I've heard people define Zionism as a safe place for the Jewish people, as a movement and a culture movement for identity and the building up of and building momentum around a sense of pride and a space. Really, actually, it's so many different iterations of space, the time and place, right? And that have existed for a really long time, and it's an idea that's been around for a really long time. So I'm not trying to define it. Those are the ways I've heard it. The part that that is really hard and that I really need to speak to is that for me and my family's interaction with Zionism, we were forced off of our land. It was there were killings like I was describing, but they were around other massacres in different villages around like Deir Yassin. That was the one that impacted our family. And so you heard about these things, and it was word of mouth. And you were like, and so my family was actually living in the hills around because they knew that it was dangerous. And they would come back down because they owned all these lands, and the wheat was in season, and so they came back down. And at night, they would literally go to the family's mill and they would grind the wheat, and then take it, so they had something to eat. So they were living under the trees, and then eventually they were surrounded in the mill in the middle of the night. And my grandfather heard something, and he loaded his shotgun. And somebody heard it because he had a relationship with the kibbutz nearby. And so the man called him by his name. He said, Ali, don't shoot. You're surrounded. There's too many of us. And so they came out of the mill that night, and they were forced to leave. And when they were forced to leave, my great uncle said, no, we're going to die on our land. We're not leaving. And my grandfather put his hand on his shoulder and he said, we love our children, we love our families, and we'll live another day. And then they made their way a really long and harsh journey. And when you think about all the circumstances, like they lost everything. They lost lands. They lost, like now somebody else is tending those trees. And so while I believe in someone else's dream, the challenge I have is when it comes at the expense of my own family. So I think it's so hard, but I think we just have to name those details. Yes. It can't just be my definition, your definition. Yes. It's like, here's how it comes across, and here's the cost. And I know these things are hard. I know they're going to take a long time to like even reconcile for ourselves, and we're not going to get it right over and over and over again. We will eventually, and we have to keep on track.
I think that's extremely powerful, and I just want to build on that a little bit because I think it's so important that we understand how we interpret language, and I do feel like it's so important to also acknowledge that there are legal definitions, there are historical definitions, and there are ways that we interpret language. And I think all of those are extremely valid, and we have to be able to go beyond simply just relying on how definitions are laid out in order to understand where people are coming from and understanding their expertise and their lived experience. And without being able to do that, I think we create situations where we other each other. And I think that's really dangerous. And I do think it's really important to also clarify that we all have very individualized experiences with the ongoing violence that we've witnessed since October 7th and everything that predated it. We also have to acknowledge that our individualized experiences cannot justify a generalization of any of our groups or of our communities. And I think that's also really important because what I think so many times is relied on is by generalizing, you create more fear against the other groups that you may not identify with. And I think what we have seen more recently with the escalating violence by the Israeli government has been this goal to essentially put I guess like align the exclusive interests of the Israeli government with all Jewish people. And I think that is just something that's extremely dangerous because I don't think anyone believes that the continued violence or any of the violence is something that by and large Jewish people as a community support or identify with. In the same way that I think that the actions of Hamas do not represent the religious identities of the Palestinian people, be them Palestinian Christian or Palestinian Muslim. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge that you have to separate those because when we tie our religions to the actions of states, it creates a responsibility on those religions and it undermines all of our faiths and it undermines what we are trying to achieve, which is actually a interfaith effort to find peace and respect and dignity and justice across all of our communities.
Thank you. That will have the last word.
Actually, I have a question, not a word, because after what I heard, especially with the mention, and maybe the question can go to anybody on the top or maybe it can go to you, right? Because I was and we could go through your speech, we agree on things, and we definitely disagree on things. But let me ask you a question. Wouldn't having an interfaith gathering like this to address the ongoing genocide in Gaza only fan the flame of religious intolerance by framing it as a religious conflict? Thank you. The Palestinian struggle against Zionism and Israel is a struggle against colonialism. It is an undisputed fact that Zionism, as described by its own founder, Theodor Herzl, is a colonial project. It's not a religious conflict, never was, never will be. Isn't what we're doing misleading congregants and the larger community and misinforming them? Speaking of this information, could you please explain why you chose not to acknowledge the genocide in Gaza and instead opted to use the word loss? None of this.
Or whether we'll.
I mean, thank you for that. This is a question that I have talked with dozens and dozens of people on regarding the construction of that statement. This was not written by me, even though I was one of the major motivating forces. Oh, I'm sorry, pardon me, yes. Yeah, just to repeat. So the document that the Institute put out was eyed and contributed to by, I would say, probably about a dozen people, even though I was the motivating force behind it. In order to actually get to the point where we could have a consensus and put it out, a number of people demanded that we not use the word genocide. And so as far as I was concerned, mass murder is just fine to define what is going on. There's more to it than that. I mean, I don't think that we have the time to discuss this right now, but I want to continue to discuss this. What I would say about the accusation that this is not an appropriate context, or that we are obfuscating or misleading the discussion by couching this in terms of religion. This is our forum to speak up. As an interfaith movement, we don't only talk about religion, we talk about race, we talk about culture, we talk about ethnicity, we talk about all manner of things that are peripheral to and ancillary to religion. We don't only talk about religion. And so I would say our only other option would be to shut our mouths, because this is not entirely pertaining to religion, and I'm not willing to shut my mouth. I've been thinking about this ever since about before October 7th. You remember I was there at NPAC back in 2021. I showed up. I was right in the middle of some heart issues at the time, but I showed up. This is an extremely important issue to me personally. And so I'm committed to doing what we can to stop this in whatever way we can. So anyway, I don't want to speak more about this because this is not my panel. I'm not the expert. I want to hear more from the people here. But thank you for asking the question to me.
I appreciate it. But again, as a Jew, would it be called the Holocaust as a mass murder or a loss?
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that, I know that
Sorry,
some of them,
they're just not the same.
Oh.
let's, maybe it's time that we pause and continue this very difficult discussion later. I want to thank the panelists. This is a difficult discussion.
They are the same.
Difficult
They're the
discussion, and it's necessary to have. I think we've begun.
The president of this country is 6 years older than Israel. Israel does not have a right to exist. Ethno states don't have a right to exist. It is a genocide. Thank you. I think we need to stop. We're going to steal somebody's land and keep half of it. That's not justice.
That really is clear about, if we're not clear about the definition, if we're not real clear about my right versus your right versus his right, her right, then we really have no foundation to talk. And this whole thing about interfaith.
That's totally fine. You're totally agreeing with it. You've used a statement and I disagree. So let us spend time, not in this panel, to figure out what we agree upon. But I think if, I extend respect to you, if your definition is the only definition that we accept, then I don't think so.
International law definition, not my definition.
Just
I think
pretty
the topic
clear
limits-
that maybe what's happening is not the definition of genocide, but that's where we need to have a different conversation.
All these legal experts are wrong.
I thank you all for participating. Thank you all for being here.